Welcome to the Season 2 closer of the Expanding on Consciousness podcast. I am Mark Serto. Before we close out the season with this fascinating conversation I'm having with Jungian psychotherapist Eva Ryder, I just want to take a moment to express the gratitude both the producers and I have for you, the listening audience, for making this podcast the success that it is. Without you, there would be a bunch of interesting conversations floating in the void of the podcast space with absolutely no impact whatsoever. And because of you, this podcast is not only gaining recognition and respect, but it's also having the desired impact, which is to inspire a deeper inquiry into this thing that we call consciousness. Not only consciousness, but its relationship to reality and life as we experience it collectively and individually. So you have our thanks. I'm going to assume that most of you listening would agree that humanity is moving through some very real changes at the moment. Changes which are pretty much affecting us all. In my humble opinion, how we deal with these changes at this epoch in our collective history will determine what future the generations to come will experience. This, of course, is true on some level for every generation and was true of our predecessors. We stand on their shoulders in the same way that those who come after us will stand on the pillars that we construct today. The things we address today, however, are very different from the things that our ancestors dealt with. One of the major shifts or major differences being the way information flows in the current era. It's much more rapid than it had been even just a few decades ago. As you probably know, information and consciousness have a very close-knit relationship. Information literally helps to shape the consciousness of not only an individual, but of the collective. And the way that we individually process information is often determined by the makeup of the psyche of a given individual. People interpret information in different ways, and they react to it in different ways. And the producers and I take very great care to find guests who not only stimulate the imagination about this thing we call consciousness, but also have a great depth of knowledge about consciousness in its many faceted aspects. It's a very complex and unique field of study with a lot of aspects. And one of the primary goals of this podcast is to get you to think about your thinking, a sort of self-reflective form of consciousness which can actually serve you quite well. So perhaps this will not only serve to inspire a deeper inquiry within you, but also help you to find a center of gravity with the information presented to you, both in this podcast and in your personal life. We know that there's a lot of information to process out there, and that sussing out the facts can be a pretty tough one in this day and age. When that happens, that can create quite a lot of what could be referred to as psychic tension. It creates tension within us. My guest today has a lot to say about this tension and how it can be used to create something new and sustaining out of the ashes of the system so many of us are watching fall apart in the modern era. We are creating every single day. If we do it wisely, we'll create something wonderful. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make your unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Now, personally, I have found that to be the case, at least in many cases of my life. But I know that directing consciousness towards an ultimate goal with intention is a very different experience than allowing the flow of life to just take me where it will or be directed by others. In this respect, consciousness is a very important tool. And in part 2 of my interview with Eva Ryder, we're going to go down this rabbit hole of how consciousness and fate walk hand in hand as we climb up the tree of life. Hope you enjoy it and discover something new about yourself. Now the audience, I think, might have a better grasp of evolution and involution. The process of involution is the process of acknowledging these energies that are archetypal, perhaps,
Yes.
but moving and having their way within us. They do. They have their way within all of us. And as we explore the tree of life for the audience, they'll kind of get a sense of what this means. Involution, on the other hand, is the conscious awakening and the climbing up to evolve into this place of being able to materialize spirit and spiritualize matter. That
Exactly.
is the alchemical connection there.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're
Yeah.
talking really about psychological principles here, too, though. We're not just
Yeah.
talking about mystical connections between the gods and humanity or the planets and their influences in the world, or using the tarot as a source of divination. We are talking about a pathway and a journey that is also referred to in psychological circles as self-actualization and self-realization. Would you agree with that?
I would fully agree with that. Exactly.
Good. Well, then let's get back to the messages Kabbalah, the Tarot, and astrology have for us in terms of the psycho-spiritual awakening process in Jungian psychotherapy, referring to the shadow work that you were talking about earlier. Climbing up from our connection in consciousness to earthly things to connect with higher forms of energies or archetypes, we get to the sphere called Yesod. It's a Hebrew word for foundation, and it's connected to the moon as representing the unconscious and refers to shadow work. In the Lurianic tradition of Kabbalah, they talk about Yesod as having no light of its own, as you mentioned. It is merely a reflection of the sun. Okay?
Yes. Yeah.
That light in mystical circles is called the Shekinah, the feminine face or the feminine idea of the divine, the Holy Spirit in Judeo-Christian language. That light, in my opinion, is the light of consciousness, the light of conscious awareness from a personal perspective. Do you think that maybe psychologists can get a grasp of the importance of being able to make the unconscious conscious in order to help a person become more whole, more balanced?
Yeah. That's a huge question. Well, getting back to the moon, as you said, is a reflection of the sun, and the sun is a reflection of the sun behind the sun, higher up.
Right.
And through that runs this gnosis idea that comes through Dot.
Gnosis defined as?
Gnosis as knowledge.
Bingo.
The knowledge. And that is very much connected. Now, the Shekinah is the Sophia. There are many names, of course. Shekinah is the essence, the feminine essence, but also the Sophia, who is in Greek wisdom, and who apparently fell from grace, fell from her position with the God. She is the feminine face of God. And the Shekinah is analogous to that, I believe. I think it's the same. So as the moon is the reflection of the sun, it's also a mediator, as you mentioned. It also is connected to the earth. Right. So we're in the realm of the, as you called, subconscious, unconscious. But it's a lower level. It's a level that it's what's been referred to as the psychoid. And this is really important because the psychoid phase, and Jeffrey Raff talks about this in his Alchemical Imagination, is that place where we have that experience between the dream state, for instance, or the visionary state, and it's the mediator between that and our earth. There's more than one psychoid phase, but it's an in-between where it manifests physically. And maybe even where synchronicities happen. is in this in-between phase, in the cycloid phase. And certainly some of the people you've been interviewing are talking about the cycloid. The psi world is the cycloid phase,
exactly.
Right? Yeah. So, what else about the moon? I mean, I think the other thing about the moon is it's about feeling.
Yes.
And
Certainly
it's very
informed by it.
Informed by feeling.
Right.
Yes. And it's the mother, astrologically, the moon is the mother.
Right.
So it has to do with that container of feeling. It reflects the sun. It has, as you said, no light of its own. And the reflection is that feminine, where it creates that dance between the unconscious and the conscious fields.
Right.
And so the moon is really important, and also, of course, is the bottom of the tree before we come to Earth. So everything, I mean, the moon is so important on so many levels. Also, all of healing takes place on that lunar level, because the astral kinds of healing, like acupuncture,
right,
or homeopathy. What else were you looking for here?
The dark unconscious in the ascent process, and what drives a human being to even want to go. Most people go to therapy because they know something's wrong. They just don't know what it is that they're looking for. And a lot of people get involved in spiritual work for exactly the same reason. They've self-actualized. They've created all of their base needs. They have a good job, their ego needs. They've created their love needs. They've ascended the pyramid of self-actualization. They reach the apex, and they're not happy. They're looking for something.
Well, on the very beginning, on the basic level, before we even jump into this, I mean, I think that people come to therapy to be seen and heard.
In many ways, right.
Because most of us have not been seen and heard. Mm-hmm. So no matter what we've added, the successes those successes you're describing are worldly successes.
Right.
They are the successes that, we've now, you've made enough money, you have your home, your family, you have everything. And I believe Federico Fagin talked about this in his own experience.
Yes, he did, right.
And everything's in place, but something's missing. Mm-hmm. And that missing thing is meaning.
Right.
Like, who am I? What is my purpose? Why am I here? Okay, I've accomplished all this. And is that all there is? Mm-hmm. And so then, you're yearning for the light. You're learning for the wisdom, the understanding that is coming from another realm that is not of this. So as Jung said, the path of individuation takes us away from the path of the herd. Mm-hmm. And the herd mentality is what society tells us you should do and be. You should make your money. You should have a successful career, relationship, family, home. You've got it all together. You've got your white picket fence and your car, and everything's working in your life. And still there's a sense of meaninglessness. And I think that happens, right, in a mechanistic universe, again, is because we've lost touch with the soul. Mm-hmm. We've lost touch with this. The soul is yearning for reconnection with union with the divine. Mm-hmm. And that's because we are divine. We are both divine and material. And I think that if anything, with the kind of therapy that I've come to do, is to find that intersection point through soul, mm-hmm. Of where we meet the divine. Where does it, and of course, we've talked about synchronicity, mm-hmm. and that's always a clue. It gives us that clue, right. that, there's more here than meets the eye. We are not just these mundane beings that are just going to live and then we're going to die and it's gone. Mm-hmm. There's something else that potentially now we're discovering more and more, that soul does live on.
Right.
of course, we've all grappled with this, I think. I mean, what happens? I mean, we spend our whole lives building all of this, and then you die and it's all gone.
Right. You
What
get a
sense does
monument,
that make?
right? You get a medal,
Yeah.
a gold watch. What's the light
Yeah.
at the end of the tunnel here, right?
They don't even give gold watches anymore.
No, not
You
anymore.
don't get anything. You get a kiss goodbye and say good luck, right?
And a 401k that you've contributed mightily into, right?
If you're lucky, yes.
If you're lucky, right. So
But
what's the meaning of life? Okay, so you and I are in therapy session and we're coming to this place, this treacherous path, and I am observing these unconscious things that are slowly coming to the light of my own personal awareness. And we mentioned two gods that live in higher spheres on the tree of life. We spoke of them as in the Hebrew words, Netzach and Hod. One being Venus, Netzach, on the base of the right-hand pillar of the tree of life, and Hod, and this is if you're looking at the tree of life.
that's right.
And Hod being where Mercury, lives. How do thoughts and feelings play into the psychology of the individual, and how does one use that knowledge of the connection between the two once I have an understanding that those thoughts and feelings that I've had through my entire life, that I've not attended to, that I've not considered, are having their way within my unconscious manifestation of my life?
Wow. Okay. See if I can get this right. Well, I think that on the level of Netzach, as we're saying, Venus has to do with what we value, of course, because it's what we love, because it's Venus,
Right.
but also with imagination. So it's the realm of imagination. Whereas the other side that balances it, Hod, which is Mercury or Quicksilver, and is connected to thought.
Right.
It's not just any kind of thought.
It's logic.
Yes, logic. It's logos. We could say logos and eros
Right.
are also exist on these two sides.
Right.
In fact, even the Jung's terms of anima and animus, you could say manifest or come close to manifestation in this realm. So we need both, because here we were talking about, here's one way of looking at it. We were talking about how do we work with dreams, and in this sphere, in Yesod, we are in the realm of dreams or visions. So on the one hand, the dream will bring through an image. It'll bring through an imagination. Through imagination, you get an image. But in order to bring it into form, we have to write it down. We have to also merge it with thought. So thought and image together are necessary in order for the third to appear.
Right. You used the word concretize before, which I think is a very good word for that.
Yeah. So imagination and thought work together. And if we're over on just thinking, right, then we've lost something. If it's just thinking and we're just in straight lines, where the imagination brings in image and the two together manifest something. When we're reading a wonderful novel, for instance, right, a beautiful novel, we are in the realm where words and imagination are blending and dancing together.
Right. The dance, the interplay between eros and logoi, or logic. When Cupid shoots his arrow and people fall into that space, logic goes out the window a lot of times, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes, certainly.
Intentionally, right? And simultaneously, we know that some people talk themselves out of the wonderment of such a relationship because they're too logical. So they're not able to do that dance. So we're talking about a couple of principles here, one being a creative principle, another being a tension of opposites. a tension of not only psychic, but also a psychic tension, but also I don't know what to call it other than a sexual tension that exists between these two spheres of opposites. And all of this is playing into our subconscious, which is represented by the moon, until we climb the tree of life and begin to realize that these things, as I said before, have its way and move within us. We are the agency of all these energies as we project them out into the world and do things. Because
yes, exactly. We are a microcosm of the macrocosm.
Right.
And the human body we are the anthropos. We are the Adam Taudmon. We are, and I often think, whether for right or wrong, that the whole story of the Garden of Eden, which I really love, which I think in some ways has been misunderstood.
You and me both.
Has been, falling from this experience of the one, the participation mystique.
There you go.
Where you're one with nature,
right.
And falling in, it was necessary to go east of Eden, so to speak, right. To be exiled, because consciousness means that we now have choice as to, do we go this way or that way? And that is responsibility.
Yes.
And that responsibility it's an interesting word, because it connects back to Saturn that we were talking about,
right.
And Saturn being the great mother. So we, this is all left out of our original way of thinking, but, we have been sent from this place of oneness, which, by the way, is on, developmentally identical to being in the womb. So, and so we're out of the realm. We've now been given birth, and we are suddenly in the tension of opposites, and we have to, in that tension of opposites, we're always making choice,
right?
As we're moving down, and and until we can take responsibility for ourselves and for each other and for the planet and for life itself, we will not come to that place where the realization that we are as gods, and that our destiny is to be stewards of the earth and of all life. And in that way, we are as gods. And to do that, that is, I believe, the story, because the tree of life, of course, was in the Garden of Eden. And it was the tree, there was a tree of good and evil, the tree of knowledge of the opposites.
Right.
But when we come together, there is that one tree that we are, that reminds us that there is only one, that all is a unity, and all of these spheres that we're talking about are the refractions of the rainbow light of the one source. And that's what we are. We are as gods manifest in nature. That's the anima mundi.
You just said a lot. And I want to recap it for the folks at home if they don't want to rewind and listen to everything that Eva just said. But I'm going to wholeheartedly recommend you do that, because it comes better out of her mouth than mine. We're talking about a hero's journey. We're talking about the evolution of humanity, not just on an individual level, and it is deeply personal. As you said, there was a time when each and every one of us was in our own personal Garden of Eden that we called the womb of our mothers, where Mommy and I are one being. There was no separation. There was no subject-object split. There was no I-thou consciousness. There was no I to experience any of that. There was no ego, so to speak. All of that gets built over time through the observation of where am I in the situation or the environment that I'm in. It's relational. Everything is an object, and you are trying to relate to it in some kind of way. And that object can include your mom, it can include your dad, it can include your bedroom, it can also include your thoughts and your feelings. Everything is a subjective experience of an objective reality, on one level of reality. On another level of reality, as you pointed out with Jung's observation, everything is reality, including the thoughts and feelings and private worlds that we all have individually in our consciousness, in our dreams, in our imagination. Did I encapsulate that pretty well?
Yes. I
Okay.
mean, imagination, as Jung said, imagination becomes reality when we bring it into manifestation.
And we'll return to my conversation with Eva Ryder in just a moment.
Expanding on Consciousness is brought to you by the Monroe Institute, a nonprofit organization and leader in consciousness education and research, teaching you how to actively explore and use expanded states of consciousness, providing direct experiences that are deeply personal, uniquely meaningful, and life-changing. Monroe has been helping people create more meaningful and joyful lives through the guided exploration of expanded consciousness for 50 years. Gain the knowledge and understanding you seek to create the life you desire. Learn more about where to start your journey to expanded awareness with Monroe. Visit monroeinstitute.org or check out our Expand Meditation app, available on the App Store or Google Play.
Climbing up the tree of life, I'm now coming to realization and light that my subconscious is the machinery in which I've created my life, and that is informed by my thoughts and feelings, which have, God attributions and archetypes that we could talk about to try to invoke the images and stir the depths of our imagination. We move to a new sphere. In Hebrew, Tipheret. It lives in the center of the tree of life. In some systems, that is the point of conjunctio.
Yes.
Where the upper world and the lower world begin to interface.
Yes.
Let's talk about what's in it for me. As an individual. I'm doing all this work and, psycho-spiritual work. I'm starting to understand a little bit about Kabbalah and my own hero's journey and the way these energies move within me. And I'm working with this wonderful person who's also a psychotherapist or, is involved in that type of psycho-spiritual work. And we get to this place, this new place called Tipheret. What's in it for me? I mean, once I have an idea that I'm not just my physical body, that there's more to the picture than meets the eye of my reality. Give me some of the benefits of this.
Well, Tipheret has also been called the Buddha or Christ consciousness. It is absolutely, as you said, it's the center of the tree. It's associated with the sun. It's called beauty. Beauty, I often think, if you have lost the balance,
mm-hmm.
If you've lost your balance and you can't find love and you're in that dark place, if you can find anything of beauty to connect to,
mm-hmm.
it will bring you back into balance.
Mm-hmm.
It will, truth and love and beauty are synonymous. So you will come back into that balance point through it. It does represent the sun, S-U-N,
mm-hmm.
it all, or S-O-N.
Mm-hmm.
So it is the ultimate balance point. And if you were, as you well know, if you were to fold up the tree, it becomes a cube.
Mm-hmm.
And that cube, Tipheret is the center of everything. It
mm-hmm.
is the midpoint.
Mm-hmm.
It links the divine,
mm-hmm.
what we call Keter, the divine, the crown,
mm-hmm.
with the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's in the center, it's the middle pillar, as they call it in Kabbalah, right? Mm-hmm. It is reflecting on a physical level the divine light that is beyond the physical, that is out even beyond perhaps the archetypal. I tend to think that the very top is beyond the archetypal, but it's a reflection on earth of the sun behind the sun. And so it's the center of the soul. Now, it has been said, and you might know more about this than I can, you can speak to this, that in Kabbalah, maybe it's on the lower planes, the sun, the Tipheret, is as far as you can go in the human body without disintegrating into the light.
Possibly.
So, the old story of the Arthurian legend of Gawain, that when he found the Grail, and the Grail is also a representation of the Tipheret, of the sun, that he disintegrated into the light.
Or Icarus flying too close.
Or Icarus flying too close. Right. Exactly. Right. Yes. Thank you. Yes.
It has consequences.
It has consequences when you go beyond that. Now, if you are in this place, our goal for individuation, I think, is to arrive at that place of beauty, of Tipheret, because that is the place where wholeness can happen, because everything meets in that center point. And it's also connected to the heart.
Right.
And the human body, if we were to back into it, that is the place of the heart.
Or the solar plexus region.
The solar plexus region, right. Exactly. So it's the heart, but also the power center. Right. Because the solar plexus is the power center, but it does also incorporate heart and power. And it's the power center of the whole universe on a cosmic level, but on a physical level, if we were to back into the Kabbalistic tree, it is the heart solar plexus. And, we know that that's the center of where all of the two sides and above and below, everything meets there. And so it's the mediation point. And I think of it, and I could be wrong, but I always imagine it as the soul. Yes. It's the seat of the soul, that place. And there is a divine beyond that. And there is the astral planes that we're talking about, the dream states that are below that. And the earth is below that. But this is the meeting place. And when we are living from our heart and our soul, then everything comes into balance naturally.
Yes.
It's the gold. I mean, in actual fact, it's the sun. So the color of it, of course, on the tree of life is yellow or gold. So it is the Kunuyuktio place. And so that in therapy, coming back to what is psychotherapy, that is what we're striving for. We're striving to bring spirit into matter through the mediating function of soul.
Right.
And to do that, we need to come back into alignment with the heart. And that's what we're missing right now. We're certainly missing in modern psychology, because that has nothing to do with being adapted to right now, to adapt to a system that is crumbling and falling apart. The old systems are crumbling. We know in astrology right now, we've been going through this Saturn-Uranus square, Saturn being connected to the old God. The old structures are crumbling. Right. Whereas Uranus is saying freedom, revolution. We're moving into a new idea of humanity. And and as humanity, we as stewards, again, we have that's our responsibility. Right. Is to take responsibility for ourselves and for each other to bring everything back into balance. And that's on a large level, but I think finding meaning on a personal level in our lives has to ultimately, when we do this work, reconnect us to the divine, whatever we call the divine.
Right. Beautifully said, first of all.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that everybody who is listening, who is interested in any form of spirituality, because as you pointed out, we're talking about the basic principles of what Christ spoke of in the marriage of the bride and the bridegroom, and all the symbolic language speaking to the people of that particular consciousness in that particular age, but from an archetypal level, transcending the ages, has meaning on a spiritual level. But let's pretend I'm coming to you to try to deal with my own psychic disturbances. I love to broadcast on WIFM. What's in it for me? How can I apply this to my life? What am I reaching for? Is it self-realization? Is it this nebulous thing called enlightenment? Am I to become a Buddha, Christ-like? I'm just trying to get functional again. How does this help me?
Well, we start at the beginning. We're going to start in the body. I mean, I find, and this is where we had, you had mentioned the trauma release.
Right.
And right now, because so many people are going to therapy, not just for meaning and not just to find meaning, but also to find that they're dealing with a lot of depression, Benegredo, and anxiety. And that is very much colored by the world we're living in, because the world is in flux. It's crumbling. It's falling apart. We're in between. The new world hasn't come about yet. So what is our place individually? So people's relationships are coming apart. Their sense of meaning is coming apart. There are other bigger issues that are societal issues that are impacting people in terms of being able to even afford a place to live in some cases. So how do we make sense of all of this? Well, we start at the beginning. And so where I would start from, if somebody, I often say that as a therapist, I'll work on 3 levels. The first level was, okay, let's look at the symptoms, the actual symptoms. If you're coming in with anxiety, you want to deal with that first, anxiety and depression.
Right.
And let's put aside the idea of using medication here completely. That's, we're not going to work with that right now. So how do we find that? Well, one of the interesting things about so many of these new somatic techniques, which are certainly not the case when I was in therapy school, we were talking about cognitive behavioral narrative therapy, brief therapy, which is very nice for the insurance companies, but certainly doesn't work with depth psychology. But we begin, and this doesn't have anything necessarily to do with Jung, but we begin with trying to get the body to realign itself. And that's what the trauma release is, one technique, in addition to Peter Levine's somatic techniques and Gabor Mate's amazing work, and on and on. There's so much, Stephen Porges's work also relates to this with the vagal theory. Right. So to realign, we literally have to go back and realign the body and ground the body, ground the body. So what TRE does, and I wasn't planning to go off on this tangent, but
it's part of the conversation. I want to know about it. And so
I went to it because I was dealing with my own anxiety, for really severe anxiety for a period of time. And I know better. I used to run a psychiatric office, so I know medication is about the worst thing you can do if you're dealing with anxiety, because it's addictive and it's a depressant. The benzodiazepines are. Right. So I would then, I found this. Somebody had loaned me a book. I opened the book and I thought, oh my God, this is it. I called. There happened to be a person who taught it here, who is an expert.
You're speaking of TRE, right?
I'm speaking of trauma release exercises.
Thank you very much.
And what it is, thank you. And what it is she taught me through a series of bioenergetic. This is based on David Berceli's work of about 40 years, where he's been teaching it to people who experienced trauma in war-torn countries. He was at Katrina, all these places. So it's a series of bioenergetic exercises and yoga exercises where you fatigue the muscles, starting with the nerves in the bottom of your feet. And it's just a series of very, very simple wall exercises where you fatigue the muscles, and then you lie down in a position, which no one can see, but you can look this up online. And the body just naturally begins to realign and shake out the trauma and the tension. And what David Berceli says is that when we're children and animals, when they've been traumatized, they just start to shake. And, they will come back to balance through that shaking. Right. And think of, the trio you're talking about. Right. Now, we don't do that, because in our culture, shaking is a sign that you're weak, cracking up, you're losing it. Right. So the TRE is allows the body to very naturally realign, and the nervous system to shake itself out and realign. And it's a beautiful technique, because once you know how to do it, you can do it on your own. You don't have to go see a therapist for it. Right. You just can lie down, go through some of the exercises, and just allow your body to realign, which is extraordinary when you think about what Jung said, back to Jung, that the body like the psyche, is a self-regulating system.
Right.
It self-regulates. There's a consciousness there that will realign us. So I would begin oftentimes with working with the body. I mean, and of course, meditation tools are part of that too, on a different level, but you're wanting to use meditation as your work with the triad mind. So it's also part of that realignment for people when they're traumatized, right?
Yeah.
So we want to incorporate all of these. And then the next piece that I might use, it's okay, we're going to look at the biographical material. What is your mythology? What is your story? That's unique to each human being who comes in.
Deeply
and of
personal.
course, there's archetypal elements, but it's unique.
Right.
You had a certain set of, your birth trauma might have been different than somebody else's. You might not have had birth trauma. You might have had a positive experience. You might have had a really difficult experience where you might have ended up in, and I've worked with numerous people like this who were in an incubator for the first few weeks of their life.
Sure.
That changes your ability to be able to
bond.
Right. And, so there's attachment. So but then what is the meaning of that? Why did I have such a difficult time in the early part of my life? Or why have I had this kind of difficulty? Why did I have siblings who harassed me?
Right.
Or why did my father die or my mother die when I was so young? What does all of this mean? And this is my mythology.
Right.
And at that point, I will bring in the astrology. And then we can now we're looking at a cosmological map, which bridges the personal experience and begins to bring some sense of meaning. Oh, well, these difficulties you have. Well, you have Pluto conjunct your sun, or you have Saturn square your moon, or, your mother, your father are gone. All of these things on different levels will appear astrologically. And so now we're linking the cosmological perspective with the personal perspective right there.
Right.
And lastly, and then I will also bring in the dream work, because the dream work then connects your personal to the subconscious, to what is trying to come through the image. And what always amazes me, the longer I'm doing dream work, and I do it now, and the way I work with dreams might be a little differently than other people. But one of the things is I'll write down the whole dream. I'll record the whole dream so we can go through every single piece of it as we go through.
Right.
And what I was going to mention is that oftentimes if you have the whole trajectory of the dream, it mirrors exactly the dramatic structure of a play.
Isn't that fascinating?
Isn't that amazing?
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt
it's so
you.
Amazing.
My silliness there.
No, it's perfect.
If I was to draw layman's term analogy, your process is to break up the ground, till it, so all the places where the concrete foundation upon which we've built our lives and our subconscious that, roots us in the world. You need to break that up through the TRE work, and then you plant some new seeds of possibility, and then allow the light of the sun, the ray of truth, to begin its process of watering and creating a whole new tree of life. Is that another way of saying that?
That's a beautiful way of putting it. Of course, it doesn't work quite that smoothly. But yes. And that said, in my work, I don't necessarily do TRE with everyone. It really depends, because not everyone wants to do it. And frankly, not everyone wants to do the dream work.
Right.
But or the most people seem to be more and more drawn to the astrological work. And I find that the people who do decide whether they're doing trauma release or there are other techniques they could be using. They could be doing yoga classes. They could be doing Tai Chi.
Right. Something physical
is going to open, those channels for them. Dance. For me, very much of it is movement and dance. I
Right.
mean, a lot of my work with Marion Woodman was opening that. It's like natural movement, allowing my body to move to music the way it wants to move instead of something prescribed. But yes, the thing I want to get back to the dream work is because it is so rich, because as Marion Woodman used to say, they're your images. Nobody put them there. So I was trained as a hypnotherapist, and I use it a little here and there now. But once I started working with dreams, I mean, it goes so beyond that, because the dream messenger, Mercurius, brings us these images that have meaning. And as we begin to work with the dreams, we discover that there's a trajectory, there's themes. Like you'll be working through a particular problem, your dreams will be around that theme. They'll circumambulate this theme.
Right.
And then when you're done, you've worked that through, then the dreams change and they become something different. And as we begin to make contact with the dream messenger, and this whole world opens up where suddenly you have a relationship with your guides.
Very different process than having a relationship from your superego.
Yes, and what would you mean by superego?
I like to describe it, and I'm not a therapist, I'm a recording engineer, so please excuse my ignorance if I drop this. I like to describe it as the overarching thing that keeps the ego intact. Because the ego has a lot of aspects, and they all have their own unique form of expression, don't they? Whereas the superego kind of makes sure that the North Star of each one of these ego aspects is in keeping with this larger construct of self. And we operate from that place. I believe Freud called it akin to a moral compass.
A moral compass.
Right. It could also be a harsh judge that keeps you limited. Depends on how it expresses. But it sits on the throne of our inner being without our even knowing that it exists. Making it a subconscious process, I would say, unless, of course, one spends enough time analyzing their dreams or hypnopompic, hypnagogic imagery from conscious use of meditation. Then all of a sudden, which is what I do. So, and I'm not alone. The good folks at the Monroe Institute have been doing this for a long, long time, and that's where I learned this art. So, how do you help people draw the line of demarcation between the impersonal and the personal? The symbolic representation, I heard you say Marion Woodman talked about that nobody put that imagery there. That's all you, right?
Yeah.
Yet, as Carl Jung spoke of, there are a point. And he went all through this in his Red Book. He documented every one of these active imagination exercises, which I perceived as being some form of the hypnagogic state. He was allowing those things to come up. And he addressed his soul as he was looking for it. And he looked for the wisdom, and he found his, mentor or guide, which presented itself as a wise old wizard type of being called Philemon.
Correct, yes.
But there was this whole journey. I mean, he had to rebirth his God and his concept of God. And a lot of things went in there that I can read through. But my question to you is, how do you, as a therapist, help people create the line of demarcation between what is known of their personal, subconscious, or conscious biography and into this place of the collective where the archetypes begin to represent themselves, where Mercurius shows up, where one meets their guidance and can live their life from a place of new wisdom, new understanding, which is much higher on the tree of life, of course.
Yes, thank you for that. Again, coming back to the astrology, because this is the Kabbalah, and the astrology is actually embedded in the Kabbalah.
Yes, it is.
And as is alchemy. as we know from Hermes Trismegistus or Trismegistus, however you pronounce it. And the third part, of course, is this magic, which is that transformational process. So that is the thrice great Hermes, I believe.
Right.
And and we know from the Emerald Tablets, the as above, so below.
Right.
Is what we're always working with. So the as above is the astrological language. It's the language of the gods. And so when we begin to bring into our personal sphere, like say somebody, and I do this regularly, it certainly changed the way I practice. When I bring in, somebody tells me their story, it's their mythology on one level, but it's their personal story. And they're struggling and they're stuck and they're in this really dark place and they keep going back to the same pattern over and over and over again. Well, then we can pull up the astrology and we can look at where these patterns appear in their natal chart, and also where these transits, what's happening now that gives you the opportunity to be able to intersect and to be able to heal some of this and find ways out. Because what astrology allows us is the ability to integrate the above and the below, and through that to find meaning. I mean, why am I going through this over and over again? Well, okay, this looks like a curse in your life, but within that, there's always the gift. Because all our wounds are also where, as Leonard Cohen said, that there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in, right?
Right.
And so where does the light come in through the wound is what we are now able to see from a universal archetypal level. And that now we're bridging archetype with the personal right away. And so that is incredibly helpful because you've got a bigger view. And then the next step is, how then do I bring that into manifestation?
What am I supposed to do with that information?
Right. And there's no direct one. Again, we're circumambulating. So part of that is following the dreams, because they are, and that requires a certain amount of faith and trust. Say, okay, I'm going to keep following these dreams. I mean, I have people saying all the time, this makes no sense. I didn't write this dream down. It makes no sense. And I said, well, write it down anyway, because what makes no sense to your ego, that there's a whole other language that is trying to communicate to you. That if we start to look at the because it's usually dreams are a metaphoric language. Right. So if we can start to understand through the lens of metaphor, then that's going to open up a world. So we're dealing with metaphor, and metaphor too is the bridge between the as above, and the below. So that said, in terms of manifesting it, to go to your work with actually doing the quantum mind and doing the meditation, and then taking it again into art, into creating music or listening to music, into art, into dance, into poetry, into some form where you're expressing that which you've received from these archetypal realms, from these dream realms, and to express it in a way through the body.
To ground it in order to
get grounded. And that's because of course, when we do therapy, people do it once a week, maybe once every other week. I mean, how do you take that information and begin to bring it into your life?
Okay, so again, being the theoretical patient that you're seeing once, twice a week, I'm putting all this work into it. Am I going to get enlightened? Am I going to be wiser? Am I going to become an astrologer when I grow up? What's the end game for me? How's this going to help me?
Well, I think, again, it comes back to this search for meaning, and a search for personal meaning. And as we evolve, as we said, as we move up through these passages through the tree, or however you want to look at it, that personal meaning has to intersect with what's happening cosmologically and what's happening in our world. Because our world is going through the same kind of birth canal process.
Right.
And, we're not disconnected from that as human beings.
Right.
So in a sense, the therapy that I do at this point is okay, not how can I fit back into society and adapt to a society that is crumbling, but how can I make these systems work for who I am becoming?
Who you
like
are
what my
becoming.
soul is becoming, wanting to become.
Who you are becoming.
Yeah.
What a word, becoming.
Becoming, because we are all in a process of becoming. Now, where we're becoming or what we're becoming, I don't know. I don't have the answer. And what the meaning might be for one person might be completely different for someone else. Now, there's no guarantee. Okay. There's not, I can't give someone, here's a magic bullet and you're going to attain enlightenment.
Right.
I'm not even sure I know what enlightenment is.
Me neither.
If there's an end. I think that Jung spoke of, the process coming back full circle here of individuation. It's a process of individuation to move towards wholeness. And if we can do that consciously, then we have a much better chance of moving towards at least what you called Maslow's self-actualization.
Right.
Might be another word of saying that, of feeling a sense of, I am who I am, as Mary used to say, I am who I am because this is who I am. And that's it. And there's nothing else to say, because that's that, connection with, I am a mediator. I am I have a place in the universe. And it's a difficult time. Let's not pretend it's not a difficult time to find that. There's no guarantee that doing this, and that said, this depth psychology is sometimes a lifetime's worth of work. I'm not saying you have to be in therapy for your whole life, but it's a lifetime's worth of work. It's as you know, it's a constant unraveling. It's an unraveling and a reintegration and unraveling again. We're constantly becoming again and again, but at least there are tools that we can find where we can begin to create that. And, and it's not, one of the issues that comes up now is that we are moving into a time where the collective has to also come together with the personal, because it's a very, very isolating, lonely time. We had started talking about the age of Aquarius and the age of Pisces.
And the effect COVID had on that movement through the shift of ages. Yes.
And to bring that back is when I was teaching this class during COVID on the tree. I taught two classes. One was called The Fool's Odyssey, where we went up the tree using the major arcana.
Right.
We did the evolutionary path. And then the second part, the Sophia Sparks, we reached the top, from the very top, and we came down. Now, in each of these classes, we would back into the tree, based on Dion Fortune's work, which we both know, the mystical Kabbalah.
Right.
We would back into the tree and open the top, the top of the crown, and open it up and allow that light to come through, diagonally, of course, because that's the lightning path, through the body, allow it to ground into the deep core center of the earth, and pull that energy back up again into the body and through the heart.
Hence the reason I said maybe Tipheret is the stopping point. You can't do that unless you're familiar with the spheres that live above. And there's a psychological aspect to those things as well. But I didn't mean to interrupt you. And that's a whole other conversation potentially, because the ones above, we haven't talked about that. Of course, I don't know. And the question is that it is actually outside of even the self. It's beyond even potentially the archetypal. We get into or speaks to the multidimensional nature of self. If self can actually be encapsulated in an idea that goes beyond the ego. But when you get
That's
into
right.
transcendent states of consciousness, that all, becomes a little bit of a watery type of thing. Where do
Yeah,
I
we're
begin?
really far out into all the transpersonal planets are out there.
Right.
We will correlate the transpersonal planets beyond even psyche, but yes.
But it really
So
speaks to the shift of ages, and that, people talk about the age of Aquarius and, from the New Age perspective as being, I don't know, some carryover of a 1968 hippies movement. We're all going to dance around barefoot and wear tie-dye things and everything will be groovy, baby. No, we're talking about a serious level of personal responsibility, not only to the self, to self-actualize, self-realize, whatever that means, because it doesn't necessarily mean enlightenment, as you pointed out. As Charlie Tart pointed out, and you know who he is.
yes,
We were talking once, and I asked him, so Charlie, with all your work and all your successes, how do you define enlightenment? He said, I'm not so sure I know what enlightenment is, but I know I'm not as darkened as I once was. That's so Charlie.
Yes. So well said.
Well,
Yes,
and it's so real, I don't know what it is to be a Buddha, but I know that I'm not so quite as ignorant as I once was as to what this thing called a self was. I realized beyond, the potentials that were given to me by the society in which I grew up, by the information flow that was given to me. I had to go on my own little journeys to find that, but it was worth it in the end. I think that's what you're doing. I think that you're helping people come to a new understanding of the self. I think you're helping them to understand that there are forces moving within them. Am I projecting here, or is this what you're doing?
No. And, because the way my own mind works, it's in studying the tree, like you said, it goes so far beyond the psychological.
It does.
Right? When we get into these higher realms, and that this age of Aquarius, which I don't think anyone knows exactly when it started, because each age,
right,
the precession of the equinoxes
right,
moves backwards. So we're going from Pisces into Aquarius.
Mm-hmm.
But it's 2,160 years for one of these ages, and
right,
we're just at the beginning. But my sense is, and I don't know, this was a recent realization as I was writing recently and working on this, that somehow the coronavirus, and I think we started talking about that.
We did.
Corona being the crown,
right,
opening up the channel at the top of the tree, which is called the crown,
mm-hmm.
Keter. Somehow, since the coronavirus happened, suddenly we're in the airwaves. Our world have changed completely. And I think that we're still in the in-between. We're in this in-between, betwixt and between Pisces, which is the age of the fishes, the age of faith,
mm-hmm.
the age of I believe, mm-hmm. and moving into the I know,
mm-hmm.
which is Aquarius, which is this humanity, the anthropos, mm-hmm. Which is connected to bringing through the gnosis.
Mm-hmm.
It's when Jung was asked, do you believe in God? Do you remember that interview?
Yes.
His life, and he said, I don't believe, I know.
Right.
It's that gnosis.
And that is the invisible sphera on the tree of life. Da'at in Hebrew, also known as knowledge. Knowledge of what? I'm going to let the listeners decide. But I think that they're thinking about their thinking in a new way, and how all of these esoteric ideas are tied together with what I would consider to be a psychology of potential in terms of realization and actualization. Beautiful. Thank you for doing the work that you do. I wish everyone who is in clinical psychotherapy would at least investigate what is offered here in the esoteric wisdom of the ages, because I know that there's a lot of folks who need a lot of help out there, and there's no one path. But if you look at it, all these paths, whether they be mystical or scientific, may not be so far apart in their actual objective. When it's an objective of the heart, I really care about these people I'm working with.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Mark. That resonates so deeply.
If someone wants to get in touch with you, Eva Ryder, how do they do that?
Well, I have a website. It's at www.reclaimingsoul.com is one way. You can also find me on Facebook on reclaimingsoul.com or Eva Ryder. Email address is Eva Ryder, RIDER @reclaimingsoul.com. And the number is 831-427-9108. I am in Santa Cruz, California, but we are now able to work through Zoom, luckily, anywhere.
Eva Ryder, you are a light at the end of a dark tunnel.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, very generous opportunity, Mark. And it was just an absolute pleasure to be exploring this and talking with you today.
Be certain to tune in again to Expanding on Consciousness to become informed on the fascinating field of consciousness studies and its applications. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the guests and the host. They do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Monroe Institute. Expanding on Consciousness is underwritten and produced by the Monroe Institute, copyright 2022, and is broadcast by permission. Reproduction or redistribution without the express written consent of Monroe Institute is prohibited by law. For more information about Expanding on Consciousness, visit our website at monroeinstitute.org or connect with us on the socials. Thank you for listening.